Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our meeting opening at 1 o'clock. A reminder that the meeting will be recorded, and if we could ensure our mobile telephones are switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. It's particularly great to welcome members of the public who are joining us for the meeting in person, together with those of you who are listening online. Please be seated. In opening the meeting and noting that the Mayor, Councillor Van Zetten, is on leave, we have apologies from Councillors Stosenchek and Councillor Walker. In the spirit of reconciliation, we recognise that Launceston is situated on country of which the Tasmanian Aboriginal people have been the owners for over 35,000 years, and on which they have performed age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation and renewal. We acknowledge the Aboriginal community of today, their living culture and unique role in the life of this region, and we offer our deep appreciation of their ongoing contribution to the community. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do any councillors wish to declare or indicate any interest in any items in today's agenda? There being none, item 4, confirmation of minutes. Looking for someone to move the motion. Thank you, Councillor Harris. A seconder, Councillor Dawkins. Do you wish to speak to the motion, Councillor Harris? Councillor Dawkins? Any councillor wish to speak to the motion? Let's put the vote. All those in favour? That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. There are no deputations, no petitions, no community reports. Item 8. Public question time. We note 8.1, the public questions on notice as recorded in 8.1.1, point 2, point 3. 8.2 is public questions without notice. At this point, thank you, Elizabeth, there are no questions without notice from the public. Let's move to item 9. Under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regards to items included in agenda item 9, Planning Authority. 9.1, 119 St John Street, Launceston, installation of illuminated signs. We do have a speaker for 9.1. A reminder that speaking time is 2 minutes, and we'll hear a buzzer at the appropriate time. Dr. Umit Singar, welcome.
Umit Singar, 54 N Street, Launceston. This proposed signage will impair significantly building's facade. It is a fine Georgian building. It will be an eyesore. It will look like a Chinatown if this motion passes. Streetscape will be affected. It will devaluate the value of the building, and it will be really ugly looking signage actually. Beauty of the building facade is going to be marred by new signs. Building will be less respectable and less attractive. Present signage is already satisfactory. So there are signs under every window sill, and also signage on the extensive fence. And by allowing this new signage, the council will adopt tacky kitsch style on the streetscape type fashion. The situation of the match signage will open the gates of streetscape to tacky fashions. And it will be an attempt to, impairment of the facade of this fine building. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any additional speakers to 9.1? There being none, looking for someone to move the motion, Councillor Mackenzie, and a seconder. Councillor Harris, thank you so much. Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to speak to the motion?
I do, and I thank Dr Singh for his remarks and his commentary in regard to it. I think the problem we have here today is that we're actually been approached by the developer to actually do the the changes to the property, and I think it's well worth noting that we've only got one discretion to look at, which is actually regarding signage. Otherwise, it fits within the planning scheme. There's conversation about heritage value of the building, and I think there's noted by the officers in E something or other, E13, where local history and cultural heritage code is looked at, and noting that the property was first changed in 1996, where a planning approval was given to change the bottom facade of the property, which therefore took it away from its original heritage look, as per the photograph shown on page 29 on my list here. So therefore, most of the heritage aspects of the building have been changed in relation to the areas which are being impacted by the DA that's put before us today. Today, there are three things that I think, or two things that have been looked at. One is signage, and two is colour scheme. I think in relation to the latter item, we really don't have any control. Do I like the idea of a black and white striped? I know you would, Councillor Cox, but it's not going in the right direction, I hate to tell you. It's actually a horizontal stripe with a gold embossing in the middle of it. So whilst it doesn't necessarily fit my taste, I don't think from a planning perspective we actually have any control over that particular colour scheme. In relation to the signage, the officers have made their remarks in regards to the signage of the building, and there are three signs that are being done, one on the York Street side, one on the Elizabeth Street, one on the St John Street side, and one on the corner. In relation to the signage, the council officers have looked at it in regards to the heritage state of the building and have noted that they're okay, except in relation to signage 3, where they've actually asked for some changes so it doesn't interfere with the building facade as part of the signage aspects of it. So given the commentary that have been made and the comments in regard to the representations that have been made, whether it be ugly or not, I guess unfortunately in regards to the colour scheme, I don't think that we have much control over it based on the current standards in regards to properties in Launceston. My preference would be to leave it a similar colour to what it is, but it's not my preference that counts. It's really what the developer wants to do with the property, and to that extent I think we have very little control over that. In relation to the signage, I don't think that they are over the top, and they actually enhance the building facade and actually make it I guess more visible to people. I note the comments by Dr Singh in relation to the fact that there is the Mets all through the window line, so there's plenty of signage there for it, but it's not up for us to determine how that should look from the perspective of the owner of the property. So my belief is that in relation to the discretion that's been asked for in relation to signage under E13.6, the officers have answered that and determined that that is an appropriate way for the signage to go forward, so I'll be supporting the motion today.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Seconder, Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. Yes, much of what Councillor Mackenzie said I agree with. For those who may be at home and you hear the word stripes, particularly black and white, you may think of Collingwood's jersey. Can I suggest it's more like a Geelong jersey, and they are hoops that go around the building rather than up and down. But other than that, to me, this signage will do what it is intended to do, and that is make it more visible from a further distance from the street. Whilst the Mets does have the window signs and it does have the wrought iron sign above the door, neither of which are very visible if you're standing on the corner of George and York Street and looking down. These signs will be visible, and the same can be if you're standing on the corner of St John Street and Elizabeth Street. So to me they are perhaps a necessary thing. Many people say they know where the Mets is, but the reality is tourists would not. And so much like what Councillor Mackenzie said, I'm not necessarily in love with the colour scheme, but I think it does meet, and it certainly will be brighten the area up, and it does need a repaint. So from that point of view, I guess the owner of the building will, in time, either regret his decision or in fact change it if it's not accepted by his patrons or otherwise, but it will certainly make it stand out. So I have no problem in supporting this motion today.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Deputy. Yeah, I will fully be supporting this. I've seen the photos and I think the colours look magnificent actually, and I think it's going to be one of the best looking buildings in that street. To change the colours, it looks bad at the moment, and these colours will really lift that building. For the signs, yes, they will show out, but they're not massive. and the structure will be definitely strong enough to hold. With the anchors we've got these days going into brickwork, I think it's very sufficient to hold the weight that won't be much more than 3 or 4 kilos. So I would fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Councillor Preece.
Yes, I'd just like to say that I will be supporting these changes to the Mets. The Mets has undergone some transition in the last year or two, and the changes made inside have really lifted the restaurant and the whole building, actually. It will be nice to have a repaint. It isn't in my desired colour, I agree, and I just hope that with the installation of the signs, the new signage to signify the Mets Hotel, I hope they don't lose their wonderful identity by being now known, meet me on the corner at the Stripey pub. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Preece. Are there any other contributions? Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to close? No? We'll put the vote. All those in favour, raise their hand. Those against? That is carried. All councillors present. Motion is carried. We move to item 9.2, 6 Binnalong Avenue, St Leonards, demolition outbuildings and construction of 3 additional dwellings. We do have a number of speakers for this item. If speakers, when called, could provide their name and their address for the recording. First speaker I'll call is Paul. Could you come to the microphone?
Paul Pelage, 12 Binnalong Avenue, St Leonards. 4 years ago, when submitting plans to this council, a senior planning officer told me that the adverse impact on the streetscape was a major problem. He said the appearance of the historical centre of St Leonards was increasingly important. This development makes a bit of a mockery of that. The surrounding houses are single storey, and most of those with street frontage in Mercer Street and Binnalong Avenue are old, several being Federation or earlier. The height and style of the proposed development is completely incompatible with the general appearance and character of the area. In response 4 on page 54 of the agenda, it stated that none of the buildings in Binnalong Avenue or Mercer Street are listed as heritage at local or state level. I believe this is incorrect. The Launceston Heritage Study Site Inventory 2006, published by the Launceston City Council, lists 17 buildings in the village, including houses on either side of the proposed units. 6 Mercer Street is described as an interesting Georgian cottage, one of the earliest to survive in St Leonards, and 12 Binnalong Avenue is described as one of the major houses of St Leonards and a fine example of a high-quality late Victorian timber building with historic significance. 11 Mercer Street is also listed. The Launceston Heritage Study, published by the Launceston City Council in 2007, states that St Leonards is the most intact of the small villages incorporated into Launceston. It retains a good collection of buildings from all periods of its development, with a series of streetscapes of high visual and aesthetic value. It recommends it be a conservation precinct in which subdivision does not adversely affect the streetscape and not further impact on the village character. Where infill buildings are proposed, material selections and forms should relate to the predominant streetscape pattern and demonstrate a scale, form and materials relationship to the precinct. The height and style of this proposed development is highly unsympathetic to the streetscape of the historical nature of the centre of St Leonards. It would remain a blight on the appearance of the best preserved of Launceston's small villages for decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Caroline.
Hello, Caroline Sinclair. I'm the new owner of 6 Mercer Street, as just mentioned, and can't stumble because I don't have much time. But yeah, it's been a very long process for our family to buy this house. We're moving from a 2-bedroom in Trevellyn. There's 4 children in our family. We're intending to live there for the long term. We're at the local school, and it's our dream home, but it's going to be heavily overshadowed. So my main concern is the overshadowing. The developer's drawings were wrong. The overshadowing is going to start at our place between 11 and 12, and between 1 and 2 we'll lose all sun completely. The washing line is going to lose sun from 10 a.m. This is 21st of June, and it goes for a few months either side before you see any improvement. So the overshadowing is without question an issue. And Duncan Payton said as much himself, but the issue is whether you can do anything about it. I believe this is a discretionary application. In the overshadowing criteria, they do not comply. They're relying on performance. I think there's an argument that the buildings are within the building envelope, but they're not far away enough from the Bennelong Street frontage. So I think, there's an argument to be made they're in the building envelope. I guess that's there to protect the developer, but actually the overshadowing on our house, I think, is unreasonable, by the performance criteria. I don't think we can survive, with 2 or 3 hours of sunlight in the morning for about half the year, or less than, 4 or 5 months. So, and we're moving from Trevellyn, where we've got a northeast aspect and sun all day. So, that's not the developer's fault, but we're just very conscious of what a difference it can make having sun in your house. And I think in Launceston, it's unreasonable to lose even a few hours of sunlight, let alone most of your winter sunlight. So, so there'll be 2 big 7.5 metre buildings. I don't have an issue with development being there. I don't have an issue with subdivision. I just want it to be reasonable impact on us. So you've got the discretionary powers, you've got the performance criteria. Please use it for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next speaker that I've got listed, apologies, but I think it's Bradley.
Brady.
Brady, thank you.
Hello, I am Brady DeMeyer from 29 Long Vista Road, Blackstone, speaking for Cabraco Builders. With the proposed plans for 6 Bennelong Avenue being an established area, we understand a development like this means this will bring change to the area, which may cause disruptions to nearby residents. We, however, believe as a company, being able to develop land on existing properties allows a chance for affordable properties in an ever-rising market. Building dwellings on smaller parcels of land help keep costs down, allowing families that may not be able to afford a standard house or land size in suburbia. We believe that having these developments are key in keeping a variety of properties available. The planning for 6 Bennelong Avenue passed all planning scheme requirements with new dwellings in Launceston. The shading from the new dwellings allows the required sunlight to still hit the existing houses in neighbouring properties. The land size for this development easily fits the requirements for a 4-unit strata title. The parking at 6 Bennelong has more than sufficient parks for the development. The character and the skyline of the area still is ever-changing, with new developments and streets going on in the area. Mercer Street will continue to change as the road is proposed to be extended with new blocks as Launceston continues to grow. We understand this development creates unrest with some members of the community. We want to do what we can to make this change as easy as possible with the plans that we have proposed, as they meet all of Launceston planning scheme requirements. So we see no reason why this development shouldn't be approved. Cheers.
Thank you, Brady. Are there any additional speakers for item 9.2? There being none, looking for someone to move the motion. Councillor McKenzie, thank you. A seconder for the motion. Councillor Harris, thank you. Some questions. We'll start with Councillor McKenzie.
Just before I speak, I wouldn't mind the officer just to comment on the items raised by a couple of representatives. Firstly, the heritage nature of the area, and whether there are heritage listed buildings in the area, because the plan would suggest otherwise, and the proposal would suggest otherwise. And the second one is just in regards to the setbacks and the overshadowing of 6 Mercer Street, and if you like, our discretions in regards to that matter.
Thank you, Councillor McKenzie. Town Planner Duncan.
Thank you very much. The Launceston Heritage Study that was referred to by the recent submission hasn't been carried through into the current planning scheme at this stage. So it's a valuable piece of work, but the reality is that none of the properties in that immediate area are heritage listed, so we don't have any scope to consider the heritage provisions of the scheme. So that's just, unfortunately, that's just a full stop. The setback provisions for the dwellings themselves, they are relying on performance criteria for the setback to Bennelong Avenue. And the clause 8.10 of the scheme says that when we exercise discretion, we can only exercise it in relation to that component where there is discretion. So the shadowing, in fact, comes from units 2 and 3, which fit within the provisions of the building envelope. So there is no discretion exercised for those 2 dwellings, and therefore we again have no capacity to consider the shadowing.
Thank you, Duncan. Any further questions, Councillor Mackenzie? Questions from Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Deputy. And Mr Payton might just add a little bit of detail, and I appreciate his answer because I was going to ask a similar question to that of Councillor Mackenzie. Mr Payton might just explain in a little bit of detail for our representatives and anyone listening about that difference between being listed in an earlier scheme but not as part of this one, just to explain how that's happened. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Soward. Town Planner Duncan.
Well, thank you. Over time, the planning schemes change, the provisions change. Some buildings are added to heritage lists, some are taken apart or taken off. There's a local listing and there's a state listing. So there's been a number of progressive changes over the years, and as we move to the new scheme, there'll be further changes. With the new scheme, all the state-listed properties will be only considered by the state, and council's consideration will be limited to the local list. But the simple answer to your question is that if it's not on the list, it's not on the list.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Soward? Question, Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Acting Mayor. My question just concerns, I feel sorry for the neighbours that's going to miss out on the sun. Have they got 3,500 continuous sun every day without the shadow? Is that within the scheme?
No, we have no capacity to consider that. There is no doubt that units 2 and 3 will cast a shadow over the northern wall of the house next door. And had the buildings not complied within the building envelope, we would have had regard to that and, in all probability, required some modification. However, because those 2 buildings fit within the envelope, we have no capacity to require that.
I just feel sorry for those people that can't miss out on that sun, but if it's in that zoning that we've got to pass it, I suppose.
Any further questions, Councillor Spencer?
No, thank you.
Any additional questions before we go to Councillor Mackenzie? None at this point. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. Thank you for those clarifications, and thank you for the comments made by the representors. Again, I need to remind ourselves that we're actually sitting as a planning commission, and therefore we need to deal with the issues in relation to what the planning scheme actually says. And I ask for those clarifications because they are probably the 2 major issues, which is the heritage aspects of the village, and there are some nice houses around it. And I know I visited Paul's place a couple of years ago in regards to another development application. And so there's some lovely places there, and certainly this will change the streetscape by the nature of the modern buildings that are going to be built there. When I look through the standards requiring council discretion, there's about 8 or 9 that are listed. Interestingly, there's only about 2 or 3 that actually relate to properties outside the properties themselves. Most of the discretions are actually in relation to the unit developments on themselves. And the officers have satisfied themselves by conditions in relation to private open spaces, waste storage, excavation, which will get dealt with as part of the building project. If there's contaminated property, then that will need to be dealt with as part of the approvals required. So the things that we're looking at are setbacks and building envelope for all dwellings, and I believe that the small setback on Bennelong Avenue and Mercer Street are the only setbacks that are really of concern. Unfortunately, the overshadowing, as stated by Mr Payton, in relation to 6 Mercer Street, where the impact is actually within the building envelope, and therefore we actually have no ability to actually say move the building back because it actually fits within the building envelope, which is difficult. I can understand for the purchaser of the property to understand, but unfortunately as a planning scheme, they're the things that we need to deal with, and we need to appropriately deal with that. Now, if there'd been a discretion there, then we would have been able to take into consideration whether the overshadowing was an issue, but at this moment it's built within the building envelope on that particular side of the buildings. In relation to sunlight, private open spaces, well, that's within the multiple dwellings themselves, and there's been modifications made to plans in relation to, required to be made to plans to ensure that the overlooking and the private open space is actually still appropriate. The other issues that were raised in relation to heritage, as stated in the answer to the representation on page something or other, page 61. The property does have heritage places within it, but it's not a heritage precinct, and the places in there aren't registered as heritage buildings. So as a consequence of that, we can't really take that into account. Again, I agree there are a couple of beautiful buildings there which will be changed by the nature of where these buildings are going to be in there, but unfortunately, because they're not registered, the ability for us to take that into consideration is somewhat moot, I think. The other things that I just wanted to mention were just in regards to sight lines to the roads. Having looked at the place today, Bennelong Avenue is not a particularly busy road at this point in time. I appreciate probably at school drop-off and school pick-up, it probably is. But it seems to me that it's a relatively benign street most of the time, and as a consequence of that, I believe that the sight lines, and I think our traffic engineers have determined that the sight lines in regards to the corner block are appropriate for people to get in and out of their properties and not cause any major issues in regards to traffic management. So I believe that whilst there are a couple of issues that if we were surrounded by heritage listed buildings, we'd have some more issues than we do today. And I appreciate there are buildings of heritage nature in there, but unfortunately they're not listed under the heritage register. They might have been included in the Launceston Heritage Study in 2006. To some extent, that's a pity that we actually haven't got those now registered, and therefore we can take that into consideration. So unfortunately, I believe that based on the plans that have been put forward, the discretions in relation to issues outside of the development itself are very minor, and therefore and have been dealt with by the planner in relation to their recommendations, and therefore we should pass this today.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Seconder, Councillor Harris, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Acting Mayor. Yes, this is a difficult one for us because I have great sympathy for the new owners of 6 Mercer Street. I think to have that overshadowing pending is not necessarily what you would look forward to when you buy a new property. You do, of course, have a good large amount of open space on the southern side of your property, but you can't move your house to take advantage of that and get away from the shadow. So, and I do feel that we do not have any discretions that really can stop this development being approved here today, other than perhaps ask the developer to go back and have some consultation with his new neighbours to see what they may be able to do to perhaps make some changes to the building that may make a lesser impact on the new residents of 6 Mercer Street. But as it is at the moment, as Councillor Mackenzie has so well articulated, everything that has been proposed meets the planning scheme, and really as a planning authority we have no option but to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Acting Mayor, and it's always hard when you follow Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Harris because they do cover it off really well. I wanted to just start by acknowledging the 3 people who spoke to us today, and also Dr. Pielage for his detail, which he read to us but also provided us a copy of. And I think it was really, really important as part of the question process with Councillor Mackenzie and obviously myself for Mr Payton to explain to representors and those listening that sort of, I guess, history around the heritage study and you know, things that were on it then and not now. Councillors may remember, Acting Mayor, I think it might have been last year, where there was a significant amount of media where some changes had been made, and there was a bit of concern out in the community around things that perhaps were on a register that weren't and so forth. So I think Mr Payton explained it very well, that over time things do change, and that's unfortunate because, as Dr Pielage has explained very well, and I'm in total agreement with what he's saying about the historical nature of the St Leonard's area as a village. I also have significant empathy for the representative at 6 Mercer Street, who obviously explained very well the situation that they face with the overshadowing. And I echo Councillor Harris's suggestion to the developer that maybe there might be some scope or some conversation around that. I also want to acknowledge Mr De Meyer, the person speaking on the matter regarding this one from a developer viewpoint. As I often say, Acting Mayor, when any developer, whether they're building a number of dwellings or just one dwelling, their, I guess, prime focus is to comply with the planning scheme. Otherwise our officers say, well, it doesn't comply. It's not approved for development. What Mr De Meyer and his team have done, as can be seen very clearly, Acting Mayor, in the paperwork in front of us, where he's put that application in, it's known as consistent, it's complied, and where it's relied on performance criteria, it complies with those. So from a developer viewpoint, Acting Mayor, a developer can't do any more than comply with the scheme. They cannot do any more than that. So anyone that complies with a planning scheme could expect that council would approve what they're going to do because they've complied. So it is difficult. I do have empathy with all of the speakers because it's one of those tricky ones. It's a historical village. The developers got some ideas and have complied, and others have highlighted challenges that new development poses. I'll finish my remarks by saying I do hope, depending upon what happens today, that some further conversations may take place that may alleviate some of those overshadowing issues. But again, as Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Harris have said, what's in front of us has complied with the scheme. And, again, if we were to refuse that today, it would end up perhaps being pursued further in an appeal, which would be at cost to the ratepayers of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Soward. Any other contributions? There being none, Councillor Mackenzie, would you like to close?
Yeah, I will, and just say, look, thank you for the contribution made by the other councillors who've spoken. Again, difficult issues where there are some things which I'd like to sort of see looked after, and one is the overshadowing and the other one is just maintaining the heritage characteristics of the area. I think as outlined by our council officers, neither of those are issues that we really can take into account based on the way the planning scheme is presented to us today. As a consequence of that, we have to rule with our head rather than our heart, and as a consequence of that, I believe that the only correct decision is to approve this development today.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. We'll put the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That is carried by all councillors present. Council no longer sits as a planning authority. We now move to item 10, announcements by the Acting Mayor, or announcements by the Mayor. The Mayor's announcements, both Mayor proper and myself in the acting role, are listed. I'd just like to expand on some of those that are listed first by announcing to you that today, just before the council meeting started, we had a wonderful media call for the promotion of the Albert Hall renewal project. The development application will be advertised this coming Saturday, and obviously it's testament to the great work from across our organisation that sees us get to this point. But for the benefit of all councillors, that media call went well, and the media release will be circulated to you later on today. I also note that this week is Harmony Week, and given the current world events, becomes even more important than ever. It's a time for reflection and celebration of our community's cultural diversity. It's about inclusiveness, respect, a sense of belonging, and a time to think of people who are not as fortunate as us to live in peace and harmony. And whilst COVID has scarred down many activities, there have been a number which are listed in my announcements that have occurred over Launceston during the week. I thought it was also appropriate to mention that Launceston is a designated settlement location under Australia's humanitarian program, welcoming approximately 300 people per year. And predominantly in the past, these have been people from Afghanistan, Myanmar, Nepal, Bhutan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, Sudan and Eritrea. and we certainly recognise the MRC North for 40 years who have been working so hard and to stage the events that are listed in the Mayor's announcements. The other unlisted item is one that I wonder, CEO, if you would pass on to staff as well. It's the recognition that we received over the past 2 weeks with regard to the Launceston Leisure and Aquatic Centre being named in the Guardian's top 10 swimming centres in the country. Fantastic testament to the effort of a broad and talented team who every day provide such wonderful facilities for our community and indeed visitors alike. So CEO, if you would pass that on. I also acknowledge those councillors who have deputised for me and the council at events as listed in the mayoral announcements, and I request that a change be made with regard to the House of Guidance on Friday the 18th of March, where unfortunately Councillor Dawkins was unable to attend, but indeed Councillor Harris stepped in and was able to attend that particular event. Are there any questions with regard to the Mayor's announcements? There being none, we'll go to Councillors' reports. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Acting Mayor, and I'm going to start with an apology by actually not getting this onto the agenda as a committee report. It was more to do with a timing thing, but due to the wonderful diligence of our fantastic Civic Affairs Officer, Elizabeth Clark, the Sister City Committee report did make its way onto the Councillors' bulletin, and bearing in mind that that's an internal document, I will very briefly outline that for the purposes of the Sister City Committee. Councillors would remember earlier in the year, Acting Mayor, that we did share a report around a small grant that was made available by the state government to conduct activity to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Fujian in China Sister City relationship, and due to obviously the limitations around global travel, the decision was made that a small showcase video would be produced. The Sister City Committee met earlier this year and had that discussion. I'm delighted, Acting Mayor, to report that that video has been made and it has been disseminated to councillors for their viewing on the bulletin. And I'm also delighted, having viewed it, just to share with everyone what a wonderful video that is. And I know, Acting Mayor, you made similar remarks, and someone with your background, understanding media and so forth, it certainly was a very high quality production. I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of the project team, Elizabeth Clark, Paul Hanlon, Claire Campbell and Maddie Bruff, in producing that video. It is a really terrific short video. I also want to acknowledge the state government for making that $3,000 available. It certainly made that possible, and I look forward to our next Sister City Committee meeting where we can explore some ways forward. And I should also mention, Acting Mayor, I did touch on this in the report earlier in the year, the committee wrote to all 4 of the cities that we do share a Sister City relationship with, acknowledging the fact that over time relationships change, looking to understand how those relationships may look going forward, and we're getting replies coming in to us. So again, at the next meeting of that committee, which will be in the not too distant future, those responses will be looked at and shared, and the committee will report back in due course to the council about some ways forward there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Soward. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. Just busy few weeks. I didn't quite realise how much I'd done. I will go back a couple of weeks and say Friday the 11th of March I participated in a T-Bug under Bike Week history ride down from Punchbowl. That went through the Carvilla Cemetery with Marion Sargent, the local historian, and a most enjoyable ride, as well as learning an awful lot about the history of the Carvilla Cemetery that we maintain, as well as also about the quarantine station on Quarantine Road. So can recommend that, and if anyone else gets the opportunity to participate in T-Bug's rides, I do hear that Councillor Bruce might be participating next week, go along and enjoy it. It is very, very enjoyable. I also attended the launch of the Launceston Place brand, which we now have had gift bags out at the Silos Hotel on Wednesday. And obviously a lot of work has gone into that, and it was very worthwhile to see it finally out and being made available to the public. On Friday this week, on the 18th, as you said, I did attend the mosque opening, Launceston's first mosque in Kings Meadows, in the old Salvation Army Citadel. Thankfully, the planning for the planning scheme had already been wonderfully aligned for what the Muslim community wanted to do. So there's no need for us to even be aware that this was happening from a regulatory point of view. It just fitted in beautifully, and they certainly have done a wonderful job in renovating the old building, but also making themselves known in the local community by walking and greeting all of the near neighbours and explaining what their role is there. It will be interesting to see what that does over time. Currently, they've been meeting and using a prayer room out at the university. Having their own mosque will certainly change that. And I do feel that there will be perhaps a little bit more demand on housing in Kings Meadows for those who then will be able to walk to their mosque. I did attend the Jack Jumpers game when everyone seemed to be at the Launceston Chamber of Commerce Business Awards. Unfortunately, they did lose that particular game, but as Councillor Soward had said last meeting, a full house was nevertheless in attendance at the Silverdome, and despite the fact they lost by 26 points, it was a great game, very enjoyable. That is the last of the Jack Jumpers games for this year, so we'll see what happens in 2023 as far as having more games, I guess. And finally, Councillor Priest and I attended a community information consultation with the Scotch Oakburn College over their new development application at the junior school down in Elfin Road, where there was probably 40 to 50 local residents where they undertook to consult with them about their development application and seek their feedback. And I think that was an excellent community input. Or the school didn't have to do it, but they did it because they wanted to be a good community citizen and actually learn from what they could do then to make it better. And I think it's very important that we realise that as a planning authority, when we get a DA in front of us, we have two options. We can approve it as it's put to us, or we can deny it. Sometimes we have to approve it even if it's not the very best application that it can be. And I do think that what Scotch are doing here will help make their application, which was originally put out and then withdrawn, when it comes back, it will reflect some of that feedback from the local community, and I'm sure it will be a better application for doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris, for sharing your busy fortnight with us. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Acting Mayor. I was fortunate last Friday on the 18th to go to the NTFA opening, and to have the NTFA back at York Park is magnificent. And there was a gentleman named Carl Brunton that spoke, and this guy was unbelievable. He spoke about his early childhood. When he was 12 years old, someone came to his house and said, your father's been shot up at your service station. He ran up and found him dead. His mother turned to alcohol, and he ended up bringing his two younger sisters up at 12 years old. And racism, where he was in America, was unbelievable. He came to Australia as a great basketballer, and this guy, I've seen Malcolm Fraser speak, Sam Kekovich, Roy Sarr, Wayne Carey, Paul Keaton, I've met them all. This guy was unbelievable. And I really appreciate going to listen to him. He said you can do anything if you put your mind to it. He did it when he came to Australia. He's played great basketball. Well, his children are playing now. He's got 5 children. He was unbelievable. Tuesday I went with acting mayor to Hobbles Bridge to see the opening that the federal government's going to supply money to upgrade the track between Hobbles Bridge and Henry Street, and that will be a great asset to the city. They're going to build it up so it won't be soft and high tides won't actually run over the top of it. So that is a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Councillor Priest.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. Just to add to the various other events that I attended, as mentioned by previous councillors, last night after our community meeting on Elfin Road at Scotch Oakburn College, I attended the Australian Industrial Hemp Conference. It was a networking event called Things of Hemp. I met many interesting people there. They had come from all over Australia and included many industries. There were people there that manufactured industrial textile out of hemp product. There was building products made of hemp. clothes, beer and livestock feed. It was a very interesting event, and they are off to other parts of Tasmania and over the next couple of days, heading down to Brickenden also to have a look at some pasture and to have lunch at Brickenden. So it was a very interesting event. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Preece. Any other councillor reports? There being none, item 12, questions by councillors. The question from the last meeting is answered in 12.1.1. 12.2, questions without notice. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. Some in the community think that we're missing an opportunity to reshape the nighttime economy with regard to traffic calming and the two-way streets. I know we've had plenty of conversations here at Council. Can we get an update, please, CEO, on where we're at with that?
CEO.
Thanks, Acting Mayor. And the councillor did give me the benefit of a little bit of time to prepare for this question. So I probably would just, before I answer the question, is actually just refer to our State of the City report, which actually shows that the CBD is actually travelling quite well at present. So we've got a 93% occupancy of the ground floor tenancies, had $500 million of retail expenditure in the last 12 months, and over the last 24 months we've seen $53 million worth of development approved within a kilometre of the CBD. And a lot of that development is in inner city residential development, which is starting to occur, and also in multi-use development. So I cite, for instance, the redevelopment of the Tatler Arcade building as a mixed-use development, which will start to impact the nighttime economy, and certainly having more residential development within the city will also grow nighttime economy. It's something the council has been working to promote for a long, long time. So we are starting to see change, which is really great, and the council wants to continue to work to be able to support that. And so our staff have put a significant amount of work over the last 2 years really into the redevelopment of the development of the City Heart Stage 2 plans, which are focused around the St John Street, Patterson Street, and also looking at traffic changes that we want to consider. So that has been completed to a preliminary level and has been lodged with the Building Better Regions Fund at the moment. So we're waiting, that's being considered through that process, and we will receive an outcome of that later in the year. And that will it was focused around improving our nighttime economy, looking at those elements that we can do from an urban design perspective, from an activation perspective, from a traffic perspective as to how we can promote that. So we look forward to receiving that funding through the federal government program, and then we would seek to engage more with the community around what its expectations in that space is, obviously around the design work that we've done. So yeah, I think it is all pointing towards where we want it to be, which is an active nighttime economy with a transport environment that makes it safe and active for people to use the CBD. So that's the status update.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Acting Mayor. Last week I went and checked out the walk bridge across near the seaport to see the damage being done by the scooters. Just wonder if we can stop the scooters going over the bridge, walking bridge. If they are doing damage, and I don't know how we can stop it without saying you can't go over there.
Thank you. CEO?
So at this stage, it's not proposed to make changes like that in terms of, particularly at that location, until we've completed the trial and have a better understanding of the way that the scooters are being used, bearing in mind that obviously the use at that precinct is going to keep evolving over the next few months as well in respect of the university presence and otherwise. So clearly, obviously the council can make decisions, and they are able to implement controls to be able to stop the scooters from access in particular areas. It just doesn't then, it would distort the trial in terms of being able to have a clear understanding about what the benefits or otherwise of it are. Certainly we are monitoring the damage to our infrastructure. It's something that we are acutely aware of, and it's something that really will need to be taken into account by the council when we are weighing up the outcomes of the trial in a few months' time.
Thank you.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Just a follow-up question to that. The damage that is being perpetrated by the scooters, have we determined the responsibility for rectifying that damage as to whether that's something the City Council is taking up in relation to the trial, or whether it'll be passed back and responsibility to the owners of the machines?
CEO.
Thanks, Acting Mayor. Yeah, certainly it was intended that there would be that collaboration and a shared effort around damage in which the providers would provide some finance to be able to review, but I'd have to check and get an update on that, which I'll report that back to Council in a future date.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
While we're on the subject of the e-scooters, it's my understanding that following the reporting of the damage to the decking, that the operators did in fact reduce the power and speed limit when crossing the bridges, so that they could no longer spin the motor flat out, if you like, and turn it into a mini angle grinder. It wouldn't go so far. Could you in fact find out whether that has been done or not, and it has the scooters? And that is, of course, only the hire scooters. Anyone who goes to JB Hi-Fi or otherwise and buys their own scooter has no such control on them, and so therefore could still do the similar damage if they weren't. So it isn't always the hire scooters that we should be pointing the finger at.
So that did happen, is that correct, CEO?
Yeah, I can confirm that did happen, but I'll again, in that summary, I think we'll provide a more broader outline of where things are at, but particularly that reference to our infrastructure. I think that obviously the Council has a particular interest in it, so we'll make sure that we provide some more information on what's happening in that space.
Are there any additional questions without notice? Let's move to item 13, committee reports. 13.1, tender review committee meeting held on the 17th of March. Someone to move? Thank you, Councillor Spencer. A seconder, Councillor Cox. Councillor Spencer, do you wish to speak?
Thanks, Acting Mayor. Yeah, one was a bit disappointed with these tenders. We're just not getting enough people quoting these jobs. I know it's tight to get tradesmen, but I'll put it out there, any construction workers, civil contractors throughout the state can probably apply for some work up here. Just to get one tender is very disappointing, so I'd like to see more tenderers going for some of these jobs. Thank you.
Tradespeople, Councillor Spencer. Seconder, Councillor Cox.
Yeah, thank you, Acting Mayor. Look, I would comment on that. We don't get as many tenders as we used to because the majority of operators are flat out at the moment. They've got that much work on, they can't keep up with what they've got. A lot of them don't want to take on new work, and that goes from the big operators even down to the small guys that are operating virtually one two-man show. So it is disappointing there aren't more, but unfortunately for us that's the case. For them it's terrific because they've got more work than they know what to do with.
Any other speakers to 13.1? Councillor Spencer, anything further you'd like to say in closing? No? Let's put the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That is carried. All councillors present. Item 14 is 14.1, the councillor workshop with regard to the meeting held on the 17th of March. Someone to move? Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. A seconder? Councillor Harris. Councillor Dawkins? Nothing. Councillor Harris, do you wish to speak to the motion? Not really or not at all? Not at all? Okay. Any other contributions? Let's put the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. We move now to item 18, infrastructure and assets network items, starting with 18.1, part closure of a highway and disposal of an interest in council land at 29 South Esk Road, Trevallyn. Just check my list to ensure that there are no speakers. Just get Elizabeth to confirm that there is no one waiting. Councillor Soward to speak? No, thank you. All good. Someone to move the item. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. A seconder, Councillor Harris. Councillor Spencer has a question. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Acting Mayor. Just one question. This land, could it be built on? Would it be possible for anyone else to want it to build something on it? If not, in my opinion, I think we probably should dispose of it. So I'll just put that out to, is it possible to build on it, or would there be any other interest in someone else wanting it?
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Legal Officer Robert.
Thanks, Acting Mayor. I don't believe that, in discussions with the relevant council officers from infrastructure and assets, there's no intention from council's side to build anything on it by way of roads. If the land was disposed of, the owners potentially could build something further on it, but there's no plans for that have been indicated by any parties.
Thank you. CEO?
I think I would just add, so clearly if it is disposed of and becomes part of the 29 South S Road, they would have an ability to be able to undertake development on that site as it becomes their land. But obviously that's where the provisions of the planning scheme in respect of setbacks and all of the provisions that we have in terms of what we have to deal with would control, you know, the level of development that could happen. But clearly it could happen if it's adhered to the site.
Would that be available for anyone else that could get entrance to it and build something on it, or not? Or just those people on that property?
Only the property owner.
Yeah.
Any
Thank
further
you.
questions, Councillor Spencer?
No, thank you.
Councillor Harris, question.
Yes, thank you, Acting Mayor. Look, we looked at this particular issue a couple of meetings ago, and I just wondered whether someone can give me a bit of a background or an update of why we've got this back in front of us. Because I'm sure there's a story of why, when we looked at this before, that are we now just doing a procedural thing that says we have to close the road because we agreed to sell the land or whatever? Why are we looking at this again? So that we can all be brought up to speed as to why it's back in front of us again, having made a decision previously. Is that possible?
Legal Officer Robert, further to obviously the recommendation and the wording of such, are you able to provide a snapshot of that?
Yep.
Yes, thanks, Acting Mayor. So I suppose this is the conclusion of a sort of quite a long background of a conversation that has been taking place between the owners of 29 South Esk Road and the council. It's an encroachment that dates back to 1965, before council owned the adjoining land. So at this point, the owners are seeking to sell the property and looking to move on and trying to tidy up an encroachment before they do that.
Yep. So
it'll make it more, I suppose, clearer and cleaner to any potential buyers of that property. The previous agenda item that came before the council dealt with selling both the public land and the road lot, whereas it became clear from that meeting that the council didn't want to sell the Cliff Grounds portion, but perhaps were open to selling the road lot. So that's the difference between the previous agenda item and this one. So this one is just dealing with the road lot on the condition that the fencing around the Cliff Grounds is removed.
Thank you, Robert. Any further questions, Councillor Harris?
I think that clears it up, because perhaps someone might correct me if I'm wrong, but somewhere in the document it made mention that the owners of this lot at 29 South Esk Drive were only interested in purchasing if we let the Cliff Grounds and the road reserve be sold as one, or am I misreading that?
Legal Officer Robert.
Thanks, Acting Mayor. And yeah, so the owners have expressed an interest that if they can't buy the encroachment onto the public land, they'd still be interested to buy the encroachment onto the road lot.
Okay, good.
But more recently, they've expressed a preference that if they can't buy the public land, they prefer not to buy that part of the road lot that's connected to the public land. So it reduces the square metre area from 200 to 165 square metres. So that's why the wording of the recommendation is up to 200, but probably what will actually end up occurring is 165 square metres of road lot, if it's closed, would be then disposed of.
If I can, just to be sure, so the 165 square metres or thereabouts is the bit that is adjoining their current property that faces the road reserve. The extra 8 or 10 metres on the end, which was part of the cliff grounds, the other 35 metres relates to if that was extended along to take in the front of the cliff grounds. So. Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. So thank you for that, for the clarification.
Great.
And Robert, that's captured in point 3 of the motion, is that correct?
Yes,
Great.
That's correct. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? Councillor Mackenzie, would you like to speak as the mover of the motion?
I do. It's a bit... I'm disappointed. No, I'm not disappointed. We brought this back because it's just a bit unfortunate, I guess is probably the word I'd use, that we've got to where we've got to on this. Because I suspect what's happened is that the property owners purchased the property thinking it was part of the property when they bought it, before we were even gifted the property. I think where we got to was the fact that what are we doing if we actually accept this? We set a precedent about sort of allowing people to encroach on our land and gave an opportunity for others to not necessarily do it in this way. What we're actually now being asked to do is just to give the encroachment of the highway, which is really of no practical use, as part of the gorge or as a future roadway, which I think is what our officers are saying. We don't require the land for that. The 200 to 165 is, as what was just explained, is that we're actually just cutting it off where the encroachment, where the blue bit finishes. We're only going to take that, and we want to take that land that actually relates to the land they're going to indicate, which also makes sense to me that they do that, and the rest of it revert back to council. So I think this is really just dealing with the issue that we brought up at the last council meeting. I think I've discussed since then, and it's a practical way for us to deal with it going forward, albeit a bit unfortunate for the people who have owned the property since 1965 that this has happened. But I think that on the basis of precedent setting, I think this is the appropriate stance for council to take, and I'm very happy to move the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Seconder, Councillor Harris.
Yeah, nothing much more to add other than this is, as you say, a sensible resolution to a problem that they probably weren't aware of. And of course, by selling them this piece of land, it does allow them to retain the garage that they had built at some point on our land, but perhaps unknowingly that it was our land. So it's a very logical step to take, and so that's why I'm quite happy to support it now.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any other contributions? There being none, Councillor Mackenzie, anything further? No. Let's put the vote. All those in favour, noting recommendations 1 and 3 require a decision of absolute majority. All those in favour? That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. We move to 18.2, Launceston Flood Authority Quarterly Report to December 2021. Looking for someone to move that be received. Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Seconder, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to speak to the item?
Only to say it's just a nice succinct report which suggests that the Flood Authority is doing the role that we put them in place for, and I'm sure Councillor Spencer will be very happy that they're actually a favourable variance of $59,000 for the quarter.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. And just to add, we've all been watching as Queensland and Northern New South Wales has flooded, and never has it been more important to understand how our levees work and to have assurance that they will work when we need them to work, and we can be absolutely assured that we will need them to work at some point in the future. So we thank them for their work.
Indeed. Any other contributions? Councillor Mackenzie, anything further? Let's put the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. We now move to item 19.1, petition to amend sealed plan 304 and 308 Pink White Road, Norwood. We note that there is an amended recommendation which includes a fifth name of Councillor Priest, which is indeed permitted. I'm wondering, is there someone to move that amended motion? Councillor Soward, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Harris. Councillor Soward, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Only very briefly, thanks, Acting Mayor. It's all very straightforward, but an observation that I would add in there. It's a very, very good learning for all councillors. I think probably, well, I certainly have, and I know others over time have had an opportunity on that particular committee. It's a very, very important process and a very, very good learning. So I look forward to that group considering that matter and coming back and making their recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Soward. Councillor Harris? Does anyone wish to speak to the motion? No, there being no one, let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. We now move to item 21, closed council. Moved by Councillor Soward, seconded by Councillor Daking. With regard to the reasons set there, all those in favour, raise their hand. Those against? That is all councillors present. We will now move into closed session. carried, noting that Councillor Spencer voted against. In closing the meeting, can I just say thank you for your support over the last 2 weeks. It has been appreciated, and I do appreciate very much the way that we've worked together. Thank you so much. 2:29.